There are some words that should only be spoken with a trembling lip. I sometimes marvel at how carelessly we throw around the word redemption. Or I've been redeemed. Yeah, you have. Through the death of God's own Son, you've been redeemed. What really happened on the cross? People think, they beat Jesus and they put a crown of thorns on his head and they nailed him to a tree and they stuck a spear in his side, and those are the things you hear about, what the Romans did to Jesus. Do you think that what the Romans did to Jesus pays for our sin? It's not what the Romans did to Jesus. It's what God did to Jesus. Now let me explain. In Isaiah 53, it said, "And it pleased the Lord, Yahweh, to crush him." God so loved the world, he sent his only Son to be a substitute for us on that tree so that he would bear our sin, and in bearing our sin, all the wrath, the holy hatred of God against sin would fall upon him. And he would pay the very last cent until he cried out, what? It is finished. Do you remember when Jesus was in the garden and he prayed 3 times, "Let this cup pass from me, let this cup pass from me, let this cup pass from me"? What was in the cup? If you go back into the Old Testament, it talks about the cup of God's wrath, of God's judgment that should be poured out upon the nations. And Jesus was in such anguish knowing he was going to have to drink this cup. And then people will go on and say, yes, it was so horrible, the beatings and the crown of thorns and the crucifixion. Well, yes, it was all horrible, and that was a part of the redemption, but you're not understanding some things. Let me clarify. Do you know that in early Christianity, and until today, believers are crucified? Did you know that? As a matter of fact, Rome crucified so many Christians that they would set them on fire and use them as street lamps. And do you know that history also tells us that the followers of Jesus, many of them went to the cross singing hymns, counting it joy to suffer for him? So now explain this to me. How can the followers of Jesus go to the crucifixion singing hymns and counting it all joy when Jesus, the captain of their salvation, is in the Garden of Gethsemane crying out, "Oh God, let this pass from me"? It's because when those believers were crucified, as believers still are today in some countries, God's pleasure is upon them. God's blessing is upon them. They know that God is with them. When Christ was on that cross, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Because on that tree, you see, if he's our substitute, you and I in hell should experience wrath throughout all eternity. All that wrath was poured out on the Son. 3 hours of darkness. And people look at it as thinking it was rainy maybe, or there was lightning, or it was cloudy. I believe it was like the darkness that fell over Egypt so that you could feel it. You could put your hand in front of your face and not even see. Because Christ had to be shut up alone. He couldn't even look out at the mourners and draw comfort. He had to be shut up completely alone. One man standing for us all. Completely alone, cut off from men, cut off from love, cut off from mercy, cut off from God, while billow after billow after billow of the wrath of God is poured out upon him. The very wrath that melts mountains and dries up seas is poured out upon him until finally the very last cent of our penalty is paid. And he cries out, "It's finished." That's what Calvary's about. And I haven't even touched on it. I could spend a whole week with you going through each one of these things. That's what Calvary is about. That's why we serve him. That's why we love him. I'm not religious. I'm not tidy. I'm not cultured. I'm not well kept. There's one thing that holds me in place. He died for me.